Hi, we're back again, and we have another author, totally different type of writing, but just as important. And his name is Richard Lake. I think you remember he has been on before. So, Richard.
Hi, Carol. Thank you for having me back.
Yes, we're glad to have you back. We want people to come back.
Well, I'm happy to come. I could talk for days.
Okay, well, talk about this very unusual, wonderful book.
All right. Well, this book, it's called 9/11 2.0. It's about another 9/11. I kind of had a soft introduction with our previous guest, Jack. His book is entirely different, and there's no connection. But mine is about another 9/11. As we know, the first 9/11, and this is maintained by about 40% of the American public, realized it was an inside job. And they had an agenda. They had a big event. Then they went to war in the Mideast, lied to everybody, and we're still there. It's terrible. But this is our government. You know? Now, my story is about what if they did it again.
Oh, my
It's
gosh.
a fictional novel. Could happen tomorrow. It's not futuristic like 1984, George Orwell. And the premise is what rights and freedoms would we lose then? Knowing their first,
Yeah, we
their
lost a
real
lot on the
9/11
first
was
one.
very effective.
That's
you know,
right.
I mean, yeah. So mine is a fictional story about a guy trying to get medicine to save his wife. His wife's dying. They suspect she caught a disease while being in the Army, which is the government. And so our little band of heroes is doing acts of protest against the government. Government's the bad guy.
Oh, okay.
Government and Big Pharma are the bad guys in my story.
Oh, good.
And they don't kill anybody. They don't blow anything up. But they show that they could to get results. And then I kind of can't tell you the whole story, or you won't buy the book.
That's for
you know.
sure.
But it's peppered with all these little bits of knowledge that you'd recognize from the news and the world we live in, Carol. It's just taken right from that, and a fictionalized story that could happen tomorrow.
Well, let's not hope that it won't, because that's such a horrible, horrible thing. It's such a shock to the American people to have something like that happen.
I agree. I mean, people weren't ready for that at all. And again, it was planned for many years, actually. And I've looked into it more since then, and at the Pentagon, people report the plane didn't hit it. The plane flew right overhead, and the wall was blown out with explosives. Yeah.
Oh, come on. Now,
People were told not to go to work that day, and that happened with the Twin Towers,
Oh, my
and
God.
also the Pentagon. And also, some aren't aware that 3 buildings in New York came down that day. You can look up World Trade Center number 7, which is another 500-foot building that dropped like a stone about 5:20 in the afternoon. Now, these buildings are built to withstand multiple airline strikes. They don't just fall down like that.
Oh,
Period.
that's for sure. That's for sure.
And there's a coalition of over 3,000 architects and engineers currently there's another petition going to our current president, Trump, to investigate this. The first investigation put out by the government was largely a cover story, as was the investigation into JFK.
Oh, well, that,
I mean,
that
conspiracy
was
is
very
the
phony.
title they put on when people want to speak out and say, wait, I don't believe this. I don't believe how a guy getting shot like this, or a guy getting shot like this, his head goes back like this. That's Kennedy, the Zapruder film. And people that know about buildings and stuff, or, there's a lot of information on the internet about 9/11. And
why would they do that? That's what is beyond me.
it's called a false flag. And a false flag operation is when you attack yourself and then you blame your enemy and then you go attack them. Comes from the old maritime days, like France and England are at war, and an English ship with a French flag can get closer to a French vessel because they think they're their friend, you know. And then they drop that flag, put up the real flag, and that's actually their enemies. Then they, boom.
Good Lord.
Yes.
You really, is there one thought in your mind that said that might possibly happen again?
Well, it has happened before. I mean, it's just 9/11 is like a grand example of the effectiveness of this way to instigate a war. It's not a new tactic, but it's a very... I mean, it's unfamiliar to a lot of people, of course, you know, because they're not used to it, especially this country.
Right.
But it's not the first time. It's probably the most popularized, you know. Like the Israelis will go into Palestinian territory and fire missiles into their own territory and say, oh, those Palestinians are attacking us, we got to go get them. That's another whole issue that's kind of beyond the scope of this, you know. And but since I mentioned it, and that's not a Jewish or Christian thing. That's not to be confused with religion. Religion's confusing enough as it is.
Yeah,
that's simply, it's an us and them deal. And the Israelis trying to take over more territory on and on since their countries were established. And that's one of their tactics.
Boy, it's mind-boggling, you know, to think that what did they do? They had to build those buildings so they would fall down?
Well, no, I don't think that's the case at all. We all know there's corruption in probably the building departments everywhere, but I'm sure they were built to specs and all that, and no, plenty strong. They built them to stay there.
Well, how
you
could
know,
they just disappear like that?
Explosives were used, Carol. You know, I've looked into this, you know, and they say people were working on the building and they replaced fire extinguishers. They'd have fire extinguishers throughout the building. And you go in with a bunch of fire extinguishers and yeah, we're changing out the fire extinguishers because they do expire. They're supposed to be changed every so often.
Yeah.
The propellant diminishes and such. But it's a nice little steel canister just like this that, you know, you go sticking it up against a support column.
This is fantastic. I just hope that people will read this and understand how many enemies we have, inside and outside.
Enemies we've created, you know, in a large sense, you know. I recently saw the movie Vice about Dick Cheney, and Christian Bale plays Dick Cheney, and he does a great job as an actor, you know, to portray someone so much different than he really is, you know.
Yeah.
And the movie is also, we know a lot about Cheney already, how he pulled strings behind little Georgie Botch, you know. But this goes into it even more. You learn more about it.
Okay, you had something you were going to read.
Well, I did bring some material, yes.
That would be wonderful.
Okay. I received this image of this girl, and I was again inspired to write something. Now, this is an image of a girl holding a lantern, and she's in a barn. And, okay, here's what I wrote about this. It's called Her Name Is. I've stumbled in this dimly lit enclosure for eons, tripping over the dung accumulated from creatures I've admitted, both real and imagined. At times, I've rested in a flimsy chair. You can see the chair in there. But these times are short, for I am tormented by myself. Although I may feel sheltered for the present, I have no view of the beautiful and vast world I can only imagine outside. I pray for release from this dismal space, for I know that something must exist outside of these confining walls. In quiet moments beyond view, I hear the wind blowing promises of change. Other times, I feel the warmth I'm certain must be part of the world waiting just out of reach of my self-imposed inaction. Now she stands before me, illuminating the cluttered space I've remained in for so long. Her shining light scatters the demons, imprisoning the spirit of latent possibilities. Her eyes tell me I must abandon my burden of destructive power, genetic supremacy, egocentric omnipotence in a finite world, and a gluttony for wealth and prosperity shared by only a few. She conveys she cannot hold the lantern much longer. Do I have the wisdom to be led from these confines into a future befitting my potential? Or will she, weary, drop the lantern, incinerating me in my place of false security, smelling of decay? Oh, forgive me. I didn't introduce myself. How rude. But I've been known to be plenty rude before, throughout my time here, coupled with acts of oppression, greed, lust, pride, and others. My name is Mankind. As I stand in foolish contemplation, I realize I didn't ask her name. Sent to me through the love of wordless thought, I receive her answer. Hope.
Good.
And so,
that is beautifully written. That's
when
beautiful.
you're a writer, you're compelled to write stuff.
I know that's really.
And that picture just inspired that.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you came in again.
Thank you, Carol.
Anytime you feel like coming in, you come, because it's always so interesting.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoy being here, and I appreciate it very much.
Okay, thank you.
9/11 2.0, available on Amazon. Get your copy now.
We'll be right back.